going to help do that are sitting in this room right now. And so that's my challenge to you as well as to the leadership, is that we have got to change our laws to reflect the speed with which information technology can help and also can hurt. With that, let me open it up for questions that you might have and respond to those. I know, again, I know from Mr. Halverson, he told you to ask the tough questions. I can talk to you from the commander position. I can also talk to you from the Director of Defense Information Systems Agency. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, sir. First of all, thank you for your time. I am the 2nd Marine Division Security Manager, and behind me I have Matsarn Urquizu. She is our Cybersecurity Manager, so we are definitely down in the trenches. One of the things we're facing is obviously the operators. So currently right now, when we have somebody, the users, having issues, we're issuing them practices dangerous to security letters. We're sending those up to the DoD CAF so that that is in their record jacket, you know, with their security clearances. We're also doing a practices dangerous to security policy letter. If you have any other things you could tell to the crowd as far as what we can do down at the trenches level to help hold people accountability, you know, have the accountability piece. Also, if there is a copy of maybe a PEDS policy, we might be able to get that you have at Cyber Command for the tablets, because right now our generals are getting issued the tablets. Right. And of course that horrible rumor about putting it on airplane mode is starting to roll around the command as well. And then lastly, sir, thank you for your time today. A couple years ago I was one of your defenders, so air power.
All right. Amen. Hey, so you said you had your operators. Did you mean from the perspective they're holding you back? I didn't understand for sure that initial portion of your statement there.
No, sir. I was just trying to highlight the fact that we have a lot of grunts, so they keep us busy. So I wouldn't say that they are. Thank you for the applause. I need that. I wouldn't say that they're holding us back, sir. However, we're chasing to keep up with them. We do a lot of field operations and, of course, go forward along, I'm sure, with a lot of other people in the room. So we're staying connected with them, but we're trying to get creative with certain, you know, things we have out there to hold them accountable. Sure. You know, we've policy lettered them to death at this point. Yeah,
you know, and again, I will tell you that that's the one area that I believe we're going to have to change how we do business. We put paper on people, we put letters of counseling, letters of reprimand, letters of this and letters of that on people, and 8 situations later, we finally decide to do something that should have been done the second, if not the first time around, and that is remove them from their duty and what it is that they're doing. And we're going to have to get there sooner than later, and it's going to be tough. You know, there's an adage that I have, there's some rules that have gotten me in trouble before when I've spoken, but one of those rules are, if you can't change the people, change the people. And we got to do more of that in cyber. We can't allow somebody to learn repeatedly the same thing, and all we're doing, and I don't mean to say that you're wrong, because I think you're doing the right thing right now, but all we're doing is putting paper on top of paper. So there's got to be more action, and that's where it comes to the commander, as Mr. Halverson was saying, to execute that. The problem is that many commanders don't have the authority to do some of the things that they need to do inside the organizations that they're in right now. So, but that's another story and another issue, but those are the things we've got to work on. So we appreciate your work and effort, and we want to look at some of the policy that you've pulled together too, so we'll be reaching out to you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Am I next?
Yes, sir.
Thanks for coming here to speak to us, General. And, it's been a lot of work, I know, standing up JFHQ Doden.
Sure.
So I can salute you for that. We did an analysis of some of the things you were talking about back at NSA for our own networks. I was privileged to be part of that group. And one of our conclusions was that you need to come to a place where when a person or a system is acting outside their security bounds, you pull them off the net or you pull their privileges to do the risky things that they've been doing. Our conclusions also is the technology to do that exists. I guess my question to you from where you sit is, does the will to do that, or the laws, perhaps, you mentioned laws being an obstacle, exist to do that within the department so that we can, if a risk exists, we actually do something about it rather than sending that risk a strongly worded letter?
Sure. And I think the will is there. Again, I will argue with you in a positive sense and professional sense. I will argue with you that the law isn't there to do it. I believe the laws will impede, if not prevent, you from doing what you just talked about. When it comes to people, pulling people off the network, we can take a network down, if you will, in a matter of minutes, hours, if you will. But as far as holding somebody accountable and removing them from that network and or removing them from that position of authority that they might have, different story. And more importantly, and I don't mean this in a negative, but I see the preponderance of the folks here are not wearing a uniform. It's the people outside the uniform that I'm talking about right there. We can do this to the military pretty quick, you know, and I don't mean to say that in the wrong way either, but the truth of the matter is you can hold somebody in uniform accountable, Uniform Code of Military Justice, pretty quick, but you can't put that over on the civilian side and do the same thing. Just does not work right now. We got to get there though. Again though, I will say that it's not about a witch hunt. It's just about changing the conduct and changing our capabilities there to do that. Okay. Yes, sir.
Good morning, General.
Good morning.
Bill Dyson, NSA IAD. First, I'd like to thank you for your service as you step out of uniform, sir.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All of the underpinnings of what we're trying to do in cybersecurity come at a cost, obviously, and a resource cost. Whether they're training of our people, procurement and acquisition, as you mentioned, that sort of things. Can you give us a sense for how our budgets will plus up to get more done faster, as Mr. Halverson and yourself has mentioned, and to do it with the tools that our cyber warriors need?
I can't give you an idea of how your budget's going to plus up, but I can talk to you about how DISA's budget is plussing up. And we're doing that by turning off some things that we just don't do anymore. We don't need to do anymore. The technology has passed by where it is that we're going. And matter of fact, just yesterday we were in a meeting with the 8s of all the services and the 6s of all the services, and served notice that we are going to start turning off capability inside the decks within DISA of systems that are archaic, that were written in a time that when I was a second lieutenant. And I know because we were using COBOL at that time, and yeah, right, okay. If I said Fortran, how many other people would I get in here? There you go. Anyway, we've got to shut those types of systems off, not because no other reason than the security can't meet where we're at right now. And so we're we're turning off those types of capabilities and using our budget to help us move towards the technologies that we need to move towards right now. We are also decreasing our cost of doing business inside the Defense Information Systems Agency, and some of that savings we're giving back to the services, but some of that savings we're also telling them we need to use that for technology insertion, and they're willing to allow us to do that. So that's how we're using where we're at with the budget right now. The truth of the matter is within FY17, 16 and 17 are not going to be pretty years as I hear. But of course, if you listen to the comptroller folks, since I've been in, no year's good. And so you just got to figure those things out and work within it.
Thank you.
Yes?
Sir, so my question is nothing to do with budget, but more with your statement about moving at glacier speeds. My problem is with buying new materials. Now, I can go back to my hotel room right now and download the greatest hacking tools for free or no cost through legal or illegal means. But for me to buy a new router or server or firewall, that takes 6 months or a year. I'm mired in paperwork and I get looks, why do I need a new laptop? I just got one last year. It's hard to explain that when you're doing R&D for the latest and greatest in cyber defense that you always need to acquire new materials. And I don't think our enemies are waiting a year to buy a firewall to keep other people out of their systems. So as far as changing new policy in the direction of cyber and making people aware, there are going to be changes for acquisition of cyber tools to help us build new systems.
Sure. And I said that on the front end of one of the laws of disruption is towards the acquisition side just as well as it is towards holding people accountable. And as I said, we've been listening to this business about acquisition reform, since my oldest son was born, and he's 37. So we got a lot of ways to go there. But let me push back on you just a little bit here. I don't argue that the enemy gets a vote, and I don't argue that the enemy's not in and doing interesting things within the domain. But the enemy's no better equipped than we are either, for the most part, if you will. And I'm not going to, say who's that, who's wherever, but they have the same situations that we deal with too. And so I don't run over to the left or the right, not to say that you're one of the leftists or over to the right either, but we got to be careful about getting emotional about what is going on inside the enemy cycle of acquisition too. We got to focus in on our own and work it. So I agree in principle with what you're saying, but would only say that our focus needs to be on the things that we can truly change right now, and that is those laws towards acquisition and security. Got more time for one more question here. Yes, sir.
Yeah, good morning, sir. One of the questions I have is really related to culture, and it's not only the security professionals, because I think a lot of us are fighting this every day, but it's moving to the technical side, and how are we going to get more accountability and really visibility to our system administrators and the people that configure our networks, because we're getting more and more visibility with some of the capabilities we're putting out there, but I don't think we're being, we're thinking through the implementation to make sure that all the visibility that we have today get in the right hands to understand the problems that are there. So we constantly are running into technical folks that aren't receiving the necessary training to utilize these capabilities. So I think that's a focus area that we need to look at. Additionally, as we get more capability, one of the things that we're finding is we're getting more and more resource constrained to do things. So one of the things I've noticed over the years since Cybercom has stood up is we're great in increasing maturity, but that also comes at a very significant cost. So we're taking resources out of our operational missions to really take care of the security side. So the resource side, in some cases, we're getting tapped and saying, how are we going to do this under the current constraints when every year there's additional task force, there are additional things, and there's no resources that come down to the tier 3 level. Lots of resources going to DISA, lots of resources to tier 2.
I wouldn't argue. You're going to have to give me some time here right now. There's not a lot of. I agree with. I understand what you're saying about the resource issue. I thought where you were going. Go ahead and finish. I'm sorry.
Well, like I said, from a resource perspective, at the lower levels,
sure.
One of the things we should be able to do is patch across an enterprise.
Certainly.
But we're not willing to do that. Those are the type of things that we need to be able to do across the board and utilize the economies of scale that we can get.
Okay, but let's be real. You cannot patch across our enterprise right now. What's our enterprise? It must be 50+ different architectures right now.
Right.
Okay, and what works in Unix doesn't work in Windows. What works in Oracle doesn't work here, wherever that might be, and I don't mean to start throwing out, industry names of sorts, but the fact of the matter is we do not have a pristine network or enterprise to be doing what you're speaking of doing. And not at you, but I've also told Mr. Halverson this. I bristled at people talking about doing something in 10 minutes. And that's not going to happen. Come on. It's just not going to happen right now. And we should not be telling our senior leaders that's where we want to go in a 2-year period of time. It is not going to happen. We have got to work towards that, but you have got to get an architecture in place that as we become resource constrained, you can't have the networks that we have, the number of networks and the volume of networks, just from a perspective of I like it this way, I like it that way, or versions, volume of versions that we have. There's too many out there. It's just not going to work. And so I would argue with you that when it comes, where I thought you were going with the sysad issue, is we have too many systems administrators. We need to reduce the number of system administrators, and to reduce the number of system administrators, you need to get the architecture put out there in order to get that done. And then hold those system administrators accountable for making their little turns and tweaks at midnight or whatever time it might be, you know, that they like it this way. That's what I'm talking about when I say operationalize our analytics. We need to watch. If there's one area within the domain that we need to watch and we don't pay attention to, it's the systems administrators. They're having a field day out there. And it's just it's a point of life, and it's a fact of life right now. And we got to change that behavior as well. And I can guarantee you, when you start holding system administrators accountable, there's a lot of other things that just funnel right down there that start working pretty well. Because if there's anybody that knows what's really going on in the back room of the green curtain, behind the green curtain, it's those systems administrators. So, you know, it's commanders and sysads. And you go after them and you can get a lot of things done. All right? DISA does not have a whole bunch of resources, though. I'm going to tell you that right now. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right.
Thank you, General. Our next speaker is Dr. Andy Osment from the Department of Homeland Security. Andy is the Assistant Secretary in the Office of Cybersecurity and Communications within the National Protection and Programs Directorate. He oversees a budget of nearly $1 billion and leads a federal workforce charged with enhancing the security, resilience, and reliability of the nation's cyber and communications infrastructure. Prior to joining DHS, Andy served at the White House as the President's Senior Director for Cybersecurity. He was responsible for the development and implementation of President Obama's Executive Order 13636 on improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity. Andy, it's a delight to have you with us today, and we look forward to your message.
Morning, everybody. I'm a little hesitant to come up here. I wish we hadn't mentioned that $1 billion part. Please don't come after my money. It sounds like we got a pretty eager crowd for resources here. I'll actually, before I even start my remarks, I will slightly echo the general theme of feeling starved for resources at a time where the mission is growing. If you look at our job, my part of DHS, which is part of NPPD, possibly the worst named organization in the government, we have 3 customers who we're supposed to help secure: the private sector, the federal government, and state, local, tribal, and territorial governments. That's a pretty comprehensive set of people that we need to help secure for the nation. You are just about the only people I don't have to worry about. Somebody else does, and I'm really pleased for that. I'm happy that that's General Hawkins' concern in Cyber Command. With those 3 customers, we have a role that varies from somewhat hands-on with the federal government to pretty hands-off with the private sector. I can't go out and secure a company. You know, that's obvious, you know that. So our broad message is we try to get all of our customers to do 3 things. adopt best practices, share information, and be able and ready to respond to incidents. And if I'm speaking to a CEO or a board of directors, I say, you want a split of about 80% of your effort into best practices, maybe 15% of your effort into sharing information, and about 5% of your effort into being ready to respond to incidents. Now, that's true with the private sector or the government. On the government side, my organization, as part of that best practices, we do have a more hands-on role where we help provide a baseline of cybersecurity across the civilian federal executive branch government. What does that mean? It means the Veterans Administrations, the Department of Justices. It does not mean the judicial branch. It doesn't mean the Congress, and it doesn't mean the intelligence community or the Department of Defense. So when we provide that baseline of cybersecurity, we're primarily doing it through two different programs. One of them is the Einstein program. It's a perimeter defense program, very similar to what DoD uses. Although for the federal government, we're relying upon we have a less clear network structure than the Department of Defense does. Now, some of you in the room are laughing because you don't find the DoD network structure, the DODIN, to be a particularly clear and logical structure, but I promise you it beats the heck out of what the civilian government's got. The other program we do primarily in the federal government for that baseline of cybersecurity is called Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation. It's somewhat similar to HBSS on the DoD side, although is only somewhat similar. But to get to the broader resource point, I have all those customers, essentially the entire nation, and I've got about 600 federal employees, a little under $1 billion to do it. That's not a lot. To put it in another context, the incident response teams I've got to help the federal government, I can deploy, if you're really pushing me, 6 or 8 teams, and our teams are very small. You know, unlike the Cyber Command teams, our teams are 2 to 4 people. So we all have a resource challenge in cybersecurity, and yet we all know that the need is more enormous and more urgent than the rest of the world can possibly imagine. So how are we going to go about it? One of the keys to our approach is information sharing. We can't do it all ourselves, but we can get information into the hands of people who can do it. And if we share information effectively, then the private sector can better secure itself. Federal civilian agencies can better secure themselves. State and local governments can better secure themselves. But to do that, we have to get them information as timely and actionable. And so I want to actually focus the majority of my remarks on information sharing. But I also want to leave some time for questions, because I recognize that for the folks in this room, you may not have had that much exposure to DHS and our cybersecurity work, so I'm very happy to take questions on any topic. I'll note before I continue that my organization is not intelligence and we're not law enforcement. And so we have a very distinct role. We are a protection organization. Our job is to make those 3 customers I mentioned, private sector, state and local governments, and the federal civilian government, more secure. That's our only job. If we leave any interaction with those customers with them being more secure, we've succeeded. So let me speak now on information sharing. I'm normally a guy that likes to roam the stage, but I've been told I have to stay really close to the podium or you won't be able to see me on the screen. So I feel a little restricted here. But let me talk about our information sharing mission. Our focus right now is on cyber threat indicators. Of course, we need to share strategic information and educate our customers, but the crux of what we're focused on right now is how do we get cyber threat indicators more rapidly to network defenders so they can defend their networks. We started thinking about this a while ago, as many other folks did. And in 2012, we said, you know what, we're going to need a standard for how we communicate these indicators. And so we started the creation of what has become Sticks and Taxi. Now, raise your hand if you've heard about Sticks and Taxi in the room. That's awesome. That's what I like to see. If you haven't heard about it, go Google it. It's cool stuff. S-T-I-X and T-A-X-I-I. So I view this as being a very successful standards effort, widely adopted, being built into products, and we've transitioned it to a private sector standards consortium known as OASIS this year. So that was the first part of this effort. The second part was just releasing our products, even if we're doing it via a downloadable email portal, but releasing those products in the STIX format. STIX is the language for characterizing threat information. We did that in 2013. And then in 2014, we stood up a pilot where we built a server to share via TAXI, the transport protocol, cyber threat indicators between the government and the private sector. And we ran that pilot for a year, and our customers really liked it. There were actually federal government customers and private sectors as part of that pilot. So great. So this year, we've gone production. We've just finished moving to a production server in the cloud. We used FedRAMP to do the security authorization and accreditation process. And we've got one government customer signed up on that production server, and we're now moving out to sign up other customers. Now, right now, that's a dissemination-only process. So we take cyber threat indicators and we push them out at machine speeds, but we can't yet receive them at machine speeds. And why is that? In part, that's driven by the legislative uncertainty right now about cyber threat indicator sharing. So there's multiple bills in the Congress that would change how this is done. We're having to build the system to conform with all of those bills in a way that it will, if any one of them passes, we'll be able to do this. And I think we're on a good path to do that. So by October, we hope to both be able to send and receive to and from the private sector and our federal partners. Now, where are these indicators coming from? Well, a lot of them come from the NSA, from the work of some of the people in this room. And I really want to give them kudos for their great work. Some of them come from the private sector. We have a program where we have, right now, about 120 private sector companies with about the same number in the queue to joining a threat information sharing program. They're already members, where they give us the indicators that they're seeing on their networks, and we also share more sensitive indicators with them. The ISACs, information sharing centers that are composed of multiple private sector companies, are also members of this program. So we reach far more than just 120 or so companies through this program. And we're going to use that, build upon that, for this more broad automated information sharing effort we've got. So the world we want to get to is one where cyber threat indicators are commoditized. Right now, plenty of vendors, apologies if there's folks out in the hallway there who are in this camp, but there are plenty of vendors who are selling a product where the differentiator is we have better threat information than our competitor. I don't want to be in that world. If you look at the antivirus industry, we're mostly not there anymore. The antivirus companies share their signatures with each other. I want to get to the point where the same is true of threat indicators more broadly, where they are so broadly distributed that it doesn't make sense to market your product as having unique indicators. You market it on its speed, its agility, the ability, its effectiveness in blocking, you name it, anything but the data, because the data should be widely disseminated. Now, this makes people kind of nervous, because we're also security people, and so we think, shouldn't we make sure that we get the information to the good guys and not to the bad guys? All right, that seems kind of obvious. Share the information with the good guys, don't share with the bad guys. But the world, of course, is too complex for that. If we want to help protect the nation, we cannot try to figure out who in the nation, which companies in the nation are trusted companies and which ones are untrusted companies. It doesn't work, it doesn't scale. It's also just not how we're set up as a nation. It's not what we believe in. And so instead, we have the opposite approach, which is we share the information so broadly, so rapidly, that we just force the bad guys to adjust. And you know that they'll adjust. But we imposed a cost upon them. They can't use the same infrastructure twice. They can't use the same tool twice. Suddenly, where attacks were cheap, you could keep reusing the same infrastructure and the same tool and just attack company after company. Now they're more costly. It's not an infinite cost, but it's a roadblock that didn't exist before. So that's where we hope to get in the information sharing world. The NCCIC, the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center, is part of my